Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, both for those who are following us on Zoom and also those who are following us from home on the Facebook Live. So today's event, it's around 45 to 1 hour event. The first half, we will have a presentation by Charlotte Gjedde from State of Green, and then after that, we will welcome questions from the audience. So just to start, my name is Niklas, and I am the local campaigner in Copenhagen for now. And joining me is also Federica, who is also a local campaigner for now here in Copenhagen. And just to briefly introduce what NOW is trying to do when it comes to climate and climate change. So we are trying to push the United Nations to recognize climate change as a global threat under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. And to increase also a bit of the awareness around climate change, but also on how actually countries can tackle the global challenges. We wanted to see what Denmark has done in the last few decades towards the green transition. And to bring forward this topic, I would like to introduce you to Charlotte Gjedde, who is the head of partnership from State of Green. And yes, so first of all, thank you, Charlotte, for being here today, and also to teach us a bit more about how we can all try to be a bit more like Denmark on a global scale. So yes, if you want to also introduce yourself and the work of State of Green.
Yes, thank you so much, Niklas, and to the NOW team as well. Thank you for the invitation to present a little bit about the Danish green transition. I will do my best. And I don't know, should I start the presentation now, or do you have something to add before we begin?
No, yeah, please feel free to start the presentation.
Okay, great. So I will just take you through some slides. 1 second. Yes, so again, thank you for joining today. As said, my name is Charlotte Gjedde, and I come from the organization called State of Green. I will tell you a little bit about what we do in just a second. But basically, I'm going to tell you about the Danish green transition and how we in Denmark work with these 4 global challenges that you can see on the screen now, which is how can we power our future with sustainable energy, and create smart, green and livable cities, ensure water security for a growing world, and move towards a circular economy. So that's how we, in State of Green, frame the 4 global challenges that we have within the green sector and the climate crisis in general. Yes. So what I'm basically going to tell you a little bit about today is what you can see here. So if you should remember anything from the next 45 minutes, it's basically this slide. So this is showing the development of Denmark's CO2 reduction since 1990, but also showing the targets that we have towards 2030 and towards 2050. And I will explain some of the numbers behind it, but also explain what we've done to reach the targets we are at today, and also towards 2030 and 2050. Yes, but a little bit about State of Green as an organization, where I come from. We are a public-private partnership, and we work to promote green solutions to international decision makers. So both political decision makers, companies, authorities, and media. All to showcase some concrete solutions that we actually have implemented in Denmark in order to reach CO2 reductions, and also to showcase some of the challenges that we've actually also had. And what does it mean to be a public-private partnership? It means that we are heavily owned by the Danish government and heavily owned by 4 major Danish business organizations. And this collaboration between the public and private sector is also big part of the Danish green transition. It's kind of core of why we've been able to do what we do in Denmark, because there's a strong trust and strong relationship between these two important stakeholders, the public and private, where the private sector can and have also contributed with a lot of the solutions in reducing CO2, which is quite important when looking at it. Yes, and also just to let you all know, for the questions that you have for the next coming 45 minutes, we are a non-political organization. So what we basically do is that we try to share the knowledge and the solutions that we have in Denmark, but we don't push political or work as a lobby organization as such. We more showcase what we have done historically. Yes. And what we try to do is that we are present online, where we showcase the Danish Green Network, the organizations and companies, municipalities, cities working with it. And then we usually, when it's not Corona times, we also have a lot of visitors coming to Denmark, where we showcase the different solutions that we have, both within, as you can see in the pictures, wind energy, wastewater treatment, city solutions, sustainable transportation, and so on. Yes, I will try and just show you a short movie now, which basically sums up the Danish green transition in 4 minutes and 35 seconds.
By 2050, Denmark will be independent of fossil fuels, an energy-efficient society powered by renewables, fueled by nature. We're well on the way to a greener future, but we're not quite there yet. Let's share experiences and inspire each other to continue the journey. It was the oil crises in the 1970s that triggered our green transition. We began to invest in renewable energy and focus on energy-efficient solutions to break our dependence on imported oil. Since 1980, Denmark's economy has grown by more than 90%, while our energy consumption has remained the same, and our CO2 emissions have been reduced. But we still need to make progress. Sustainable energy sources must be harnessed globally and across borders. We need to create a balanced, intelligent energy system to power our common future. Around 70% of Denmark's electricity is generated by renewables. We invest in green infrastructure and technologies across biomass, solar, geothermal energy, and not least wind energy. Our degree of self-sufficiency is around 85%. It's not just a matter of security of supply, we see it as a long-term driver for green growth. To finance the green transition, we foster public and private partnerships and let citizens invest through shared ownership. A key driver for green growth is energy efficiency. Buildings alone account for 40% of global energy consumption. However, existing technology for energy renovation and retrofitting can save at least 50%. Investing in energy renovations is also good business, with a high return on investment and short payback times. Everyone can benefit from energy-efficient solutions, for instance through district heating. In Copenhagen, the capital of Denmark, more than 95% of households are connected to district heating. 60% of it is generated from renewables. Scarcity of resources is a key challenge, as 9 billion people will share the planet by 2050. The circular economy can provide an answer to this challenge by balancing resource efficiency and economic growth. In Denmark, around 70% of our waste is recycled and reused as raw materials for production and as nutrients for agriculture. In fact, only around 4% of waste in Denmark is sent to landfill. By 2030, global water consumption will have increased by 30%. In Denmark, total water consumption has fallen by approximately 40% since 1980 due to a constant focus on water savings and water efficiency. Water management strategies mean we have reduced water leakage to well below 10%. Wastewater treatment plants are becoming energy and resource recovery facilities. By modernizing the sewage system, our harbour water is clean enough to swim in, increasing citizens' quality of life. By 2050, more than 70% of the world's population will live in urban areas. Green, livable cities require a holistic approach to transportation, infrastructure, and climate adaptation. Intelligent mobility solutions combat traffic congestion, leading to reduced pollution and clean air. Climate adaptation solutions above ground create attractive blue and green spaces and are up to 50% cheaper than expanding the sewage system. This is our state of green. We hope you feel inspired. Connect, inspire, share. Think Denmark.
Yes, so I hope you all feel very inspired. I cannot hear you, of course, because you're all muted, but I can feel the energy. But that was basically just a sum up of the Danish green transition. As you can all hear, many of the arguments are quite economic, and it's also based on that what we've been able to do has also enabled business models, which is also a key to this transition, because this is where the private sector has actually really been part of the solutions and innovative development that's necessary to also have green technologies. So just a deep dive into this story, what you can also hear in the beginning of the video, where we started in Denmark was back in the 70s. Where we were very dependent on imported energy and oil, and this oil crisis hit Denmark quite hard, as if it had a lot of socioeconomic consequences, and it hit the citizens of Denmark as well. So it was kind of a wake-up call that we need to look at alternative energy sources, not only because of the environment, but just as much because we needed to increase our energy security in Denmark and avoid a future oil crisis. So as you can see, back then we didn't really have a lot of renewable energy in our energy mix, but a lot has happened since then. Yes, so I won't deep dive too much into this slide, but also to let you know, an important part of the Danish energy mix today is that we have no nuclear power installed in Denmark. And that's because in 1985, the Danish parliament said no to nuclear power. So it's kind of political decisions that we don't have nuclear power in Denmark. And it's also, of course, a big part of the global discussions. I guess you also discussed that now as well, on nuclear power being part of the future renewable energy mix, but just to let you know, it is not part of it in Denmark. In the 70s and 80s, there was also a huge increase in focus on energy efficiency. So maybe you've heard this term before, but the cleanest, safest, and cheapest energy is the energy that we do not use. And that mantra or argument has really been also part of the Danish regulations, because it can also level and mobilize some of the stakeholders and actors that might not be willing to do the investments in renewables, that they could be interested in doing it in energy efficiency, because it also affects their bottom line in a positive way. Other than, of course, energy, which is a big part of the energy mix and renewable and green transition, there was also focus on the way that we use our resources in general. So focusing on water, that we should use less water. That was done through campaigns and different tax incentives, but also very much through increased water prices. So the water price in Denmark per hectoliter is quite high compared to the rest of the world. And that has affected our water consumption to a large degree, where we use much less water. So they call it the real price of water, where you pay not only for what you use, but also for the water being delivered to you and being treated afterwards, making you value it a bit more maybe. Then you can also see the last thing here on the right side, which is household waste and recycled. So in Denmark, we're actually not that good in the waste field. We produce the most waste per capita in the EU. But we are then also focusing on how we can recycle and handle this waste in an intelligent way, because we do have an issue with the amount of waste. Yes, not so much here, but you could see that already in 1997 we have saved 30% of our water compared to 1980s because of the things I said before. And this was also the first time that we became self-sufficient on our own production of oil, natural gas, and renewable energy. And we had around 18% of renewables in our energy mix back then. So it was also developing, which was through these first offshore wind farms and onshore wind turbines really being deployed throughout of Denmark. Yes. I'm skipping a little bit here. As you can see now, we're already in 2012. So this is an important stepping stone in the Danish green transition, because this is where we in Denmark for the first time agreed on a long-term goal towards 2050, that we wanted to be independent of fossil fuels by 2050. And of course, it's ambitious, it's long-term, but it's also characterized that it has a really broad political support. So almost all the parties in the Danish parliament, they supported this goal, which is also key for the private sector and the investment environment, that they know that this goal will be there, although we might get a new government. And that's of course important when you want to develop solutions and also invest in the innovative technologies needed. So a very, very important stepping stone, and also characterizes the way we work with energy policy and climate policy in Denmark today. Yes, so another important slide, another graph for you guys. This is kind of the key as well in terms of what we've been able to do in Denmark, and this is also evident in other countries in the world. But it's basically that we've been able to decouple growth from our CO2 emissions. And this story is really important because it shows that you can have green growth, green and sustainable growth. And this is very much done through, as said before, energy efficiency and water efficiency measures. So as you can see, our GDP has grown, maybe I'll just move my face. Our GDP has grown around 100% since the 1980s, while our energy consumption has stayed more or less the same, and our CO2 emissions has decreased by 40%. So by every GDP we produce, we've been able to use less energy by each year and each decade, and also less water, where this has actually also decreased by around 40%. So energy efficiency, and of course also the implementation of renewable energy in our energy mix. So I will have another slide on this, but basically that we have deployed more and increased our capacity in renewables has also meant that we've been able to decrease our CO2 consumption. Yes. So our energy mix today, as you can see, we have around 33% renewable energy in our energy mix. So although we like to say that we are world leader and we are very green in Denmark, we do have a lot of fossil fuels in our energy mix still. But of those renewables, a big part of it is biomass, and that's in our heating system, where we, as you also heard in the video, have deployed district heating to very big parts of Denmark, where we have straw and wood pellets and waste straw and waste wood, which are burnt in power plants and is producing electricity and heat. So Denmark being quite a cold country, we use a lot of heat. And as you can see, biomass is a big part of this. Then, as you have probably maybe also heard before, we also have quite a lot of wind energy. So in the number you can see here, it's around 20%, but that's in our total energy mix. If you look only at electricity, the electricity in our houses and so on, wind energy represents more than 43%. So wind energy is a big part of the electricity production. And then the rest of the renewables that you can see, we do have a little bit of solar, not a lot in Denmark, unfortunately, but the solar that we do have, we try to utilize this for solar heating as well. And then we do also have some waste to energy. As you have, we do have a lot of waste. So we try to incinerate some of this waste and also produce electricity and heating. And lastly, we have biogas and biofuel in our energy mix today, and it's also planned to be a big part of our energy mix in the future. So one of the big sinners in CO2 emissions is the agricultural sector and food sector, and they are looking very much into how biogas can be part of their value chain and also increase their renewable energy. Yes. So just also, I think important when looking at climate plans and also in Denmark is that we do have not only goals towards 2050, but also 2030. So part-time goals. And that's of course important when you want to ensure that we don't do all the activities in 2048, but we actually start implementing solutions today towards 2030 as well. And some of the goals here is that we want to have 55% of our energy from renewables, so the total energy mix, and 100% of our electricity from renewables. And then we are part of the European Union from Denmark. And here we they have set a goal that the European member countries should have energy savings of 32.5% of their total energy consumption. So that's also focused in the legislation. Yes. A new goal, which was implemented in law this year, started last year, is this goal of 70% CO2 reduction in 2030. So that was set by the new Danish government, which was elected last year, and also quite ambitious because we need to do quite a lot in order to reach it in just the next 10 years. And as you also already heard, we have done quite a lot in reducing CO2 so far, but we're still missing quite a lot to get there. What is key in the Danish climate plans is they want to have all stakeholders on board for this transition and on board to support the goal. So not only the government, but also that they ensure that they have the business sector on board so they can support the solutions and finance, that they have academia on board to develop some of the innovative solutions that we are missing today. For instance, carbon capture or Power-to-X technologies. And then last but not least, of course, also the citizens. So if you've been to Denmark and you maybe also heard that the citizens in Denmark are focusing a lot on the climate agenda. And for the last election, it was for the European Parliament election, it was 7 out of 10 Danes that prioritized climate as the top priority when they chose who to vote on. So that just shows that the citizens is also part of why this is the focus in Denmark as well, because they push the agenda in the democratic right to vote as well. Yes, I just shortly want to tell you about an initiative we have in Denmark, which is these climate partnerships. So this is a way that the Danish government has tried to involve the private sector and business side. And maybe you don't know any of these faces, but these are all important CEOs from Denmark. And they represent and have been elected as chairman of 13 different climate partnerships, representing 13 different sectors. So for instance, there's one on energy and utilities, there's one on agriculture and food, buildings, trade, finance, and so on. And they are all have been appointed to develop recommendations from the private sector to the Danish government on how to reach these 70% CO2 reduction. And that model is quite both unique, but also important if we could scale it out as well, because it's a way for the Danish government to actually invite the private sector on board to be part of the solution and not only the problem. So they came with their recommendations back in March in 2020, which was in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis. So they are beginning now again to implement it and see how they can take these recommendations to be part of the Danish legislation and climate plans as well. Yes. And just a few next steps for Denmark. In the fall right now, Denmark is, and the Danish climate minister, Dan Jørgensen, is working very intensely to figure out how to reach this goal that he set together with the government. And these are just some of the tools that they're using. They want to have annual action plans, legally binding targets, and so on. So these are some of the things that they're discussing right now, how to implement. Yes. And then back to the slide I showed you in the beginning. I just moved this around. 70% CO2 reduction target in 2030. Today, in 2018, Denmark has reduced with around 32% compared to 1990. So we need, I don't know if you can see, but it says 38 in the next 12 years. So from 2018 to 2020, we need to reduce 38% reduction. So it might seem like when you look at the graph that we've been quite good in Denmark so far, and we have, but a lot of stakeholders argue that it's the next 50% here, the next 38% of the total target, that is going to be the difficult CO2 reductions, because that's where we have to look at some of the sectors that we haven't really found the solutions within. Buildings, it's agriculture, food production, and it's our whole transport sector in Denmark, where we haven't really been able to electrify it or make it sustainable to the degree that's important if we want to reach the goal. So we have still a lot of work to do if we want to reach it. But just to put it all into perspective, so in Denmark right now, our total CO2 emissions, so 308 million tons, and a lot of it is in agriculture and in the transport sector. But we actually only represent 0.1% of the total global emissions. So when we look into making a real impact from Danish side, what we also look at is how we can contribute to reduce CO2 in other countries as well. So not only in Denmark, but can we also reduce CO2 in our neighboring countries and share some of the solutions that we have to help them decrease CO2 as well. But also invite solutions from other countries in the world, some of the solutions that we have not found, for instance, transport and agriculture. How can we solve that? Because we've not been able to the same extent yet. Yes, again, just to repeat myself, in Denmark, we want to be independent of fossil fuels by 2050. We still have quite a long way to go. But at least in the Danish agenda and with the Danish stakeholders all on board, there is a big momentum to make this happen and to also find the solutions necessary to reach it. Yes, so that was basically the presentation for now. I think that was the first 30 minutes. And also if any of you on the call or on Facebook are more nerdy and wants to deep dive into, for instance, how does wind work, or district energy, or sustainable urban drainage systems, something like that. We have white papers on all the different themes on our website that you're also welcome to look at. Yes, so that was it from my side for now. I will stop sharing.
I was mute, sorry. Thank you so much, Charlotte. It was extremely interesting, and we already have some questions from the audience, I see. Please, the others, feel free to write questions here on Zoom, or also for who's following us on Instagram or on Facebook, and then we'll try and ask your question to Charlotte. So the first question that we received was, how can other countries follow the example of Denmark to help stop the climate crisis?
Yes, good question. I think what we've learned from the Danish example is that it's important that you set goals, both long-term goals, but also these mid-term goals to mobilize action today and not only in 40 years. So that's one of the things. And also that it has this broad political support, both from the parliament, the national parliaments, but also from the stakeholders, from private and citizens and academia. If you can mobilize that support, then the finance will come to the solutions. And then the innovative technologies will be developed because they can feel safe that they can, for instance, invest in an offshore wind turbine or an offshore wind park, which is a huge investment, and they want to make sure that, this country also wants wind energy in 5 years and in 10 years. So broad political support and long-term vision is, I think, important when developing and integrating the sustainable and green solutions. I know it's not as scalable or as applicable to all countries, but this collaboration between the public and private sector is at least what's key in Denmark. There are a lot of other countries in the world where I know they don't have the same, for many historic and cultural reasons, collaboration and trust. But I think that's kind of what's been able to make the private sector develop technologies that are actually bankable and that is also supported by a business model, because that's where you can get, the big players on board, that if they can see they can make money on it and that they can have a nice bottom line, not only in terms of sustainability, but also in terms of profits and so on, then I think then that's where the change can happen. Yes,
and as you said, I think Denmark is a special example, especially for trust, because Denmark is famous for having the highest trust in the world in authorities. So I guess this makes quite a difference. But in this regard, in fact, we had another question that's asked, do you think countries should use more of private-public partnerships to stop climate change?
Yes. Well, I just think it would be probably counterproductive and also inefficient if the governments around the world only listen to themselves or only made the plans themselves, because they are not the ones to implement all of the technologies and solutions. That's in many cases companies or citizens or some third stakeholder. And if they don't make partnerships with them and involve them early in the planning, then they will regulate for something that's not possible. And then we've seen example of that all over the world, that a government makes a regulation or makes a law, and then it's not possible in real life. So I think that's why the public-private partnerships are key to make an efficient transition. And that's obvious that we need that. We don't have that much time. So I think it's important to do it right while doing it fast.
And now it's Denmark and also State of Green involved in the stakeholders with, of course, the private public partnership. But what about engaging citizens? How is that working out?
Yes, so in Denmark, they have done that through, it's basically a big part of our tradition on developing politics in general, that we do a lot of citizen hearings and have closer dialogue with the citizens because we are not that big of a country. So maybe it's also easier to have regional dialogues and local dialogues on the developments because we are closer to our politicians than you would be in the US, for example. And then I know that the new Danish government, they have implemented some citizen dialogues where they have been out basically having meetings with the citizens that they have invited to. And then they also have implemented something that I think is really cool, which is this Youth Climate Council. And I know they also have that in other countries, but where they have set down, I think it's 10 or 12 representatives from the youth that also can contribute with their recommendations for climate law, regulation, and activities. And I think that's some very important message, just signals to send to the citizens that you actually invited to participate in the dialogue. And then of course just that they are involved through elections, that the Danish public and Danish citizens has actually spoken through their votes by voting for the parties and politicians that prioritize climate. So I think that's the easiest way to show that the citizens have had an influence.
Yes, great. And we have another question from Instagram. Great job that Denmark is doing. I hope more countries will follow the example, but wouldn't it be much more useful to have global measures rather than regional, like at the EU level, to ensure that the biggest polluters are also acting in the right manner?
Yeah, definitely. So that's a huge discussion from Danish side as well, and especially the private sector. So right now we are discussing tax on CO2, and probably not so surprising, the private sector has been quite reluctant to have a national tax on CO2 because then they will lose their competitiveness compared to other countries. So what they're pushing from there is that this CO2 tax and other measures are implemented on EU level to start with, because then at least they would have the same base of competition for all the companies working at EU level. And I think that's in general interest both from the Danish companies and thus also the Danish government, because we also want our companies to make money. So I think definitely the measure should be implemented at global level, but I think that some of the really huge international organizations are also working a little bit slow. So you also need countries like Denmark, also bigger countries, to show that they want to do this. And then hopefully it would happen a bit faster on a global level as well.
Yes, as an example.
Yeah.
So we have another question from Andrea here. He says, thank you so much for this presentation, very inspiring. Do you believe that there might be a risk even in Denmark that the government could start rolling back on this achievement? For example, if the leading political factions become more skeptical about climate change mitigation programs and so on?
Yeah, I don't really see that as a risk in Denmark, to be honest. It's not really, maybe somebody could disagree, but just from the chair I'm sitting at, it's not really a question anymore whether you believe in climate change or you want to support the climate goal like all the parties want to. They want to do it in different ways and with different measures, but they all agree this is a very important agenda and we need to support it. And we believe that it's a fact and it's science and so on. So we don't really see the same discussions that you would see in other countries in the world, I would say.
Yeah, that's really good. And how is COVID-19 affecting this process?
Yes, so I think, how can I put this? It's actually maybe not the worst place to be at right now when looking at implementing green solutions, because when there's been a huge global crisis in health and economic crisis, and what is being discussed both in Denmark and at EU level is now we need to support the economy and boost the economy through public support and huge economic schemes. How can we make sure that these huge economic schemes from, for instance, EU with the many billion, trillion euros, how can we make sure that all of these money are canalized towards green technologies. So we not only make economic development, but also green development. So two things at the same time, basically. And I think that could actually be quite a chance for some of the green technologies that they can be proven now and maybe be implemented to a scale if COVID-19 was not there. But of course, COVID-19 also affects economies all over the world, and they are probably not able to make the same choices that they were a year ago. So I'm not sure that the green agenda would be prioritized everywhere to the same degree that it was a year ago, maybe.
Yeah, hopefully Denmark can lead by example if this works out.
Hope.
Yeah, we have another question. You've mentioned that the new Danish National Climate Act, and you mentioned that in the legally binding targets. And can you give us examples of these measures, the measures taken to ensure that the achievements are respected, that these targets are?
Yeah, they haven't really, it's hard to give examples right now because it's still all kind of happening, these negotiations.
Yes.
But they had the first, part of a climate act law thing in June, where some of the things that they've done is to have some targets on how much biogas and how much offshore wind do they want to build. So that's of course a legally binding commitment that they want to build XYZ of some energy technology before the year 2030 or something like that. So that's an example, but they haven't gotten that far. And I know a big part of the push is also to have a legally binding target on energy efficiency, which we don't have. So that's one of the things that's being pushed for
really
by
cool.
stakeholders. Yeah.
Cool. So we have one final questions because I think you have to go soon. We don't want to keep you forever. So we have this question from Instagram. What are the biggest challenges Denmark has faced in its green transition, and what are the biggest challenges ahead? I think this should be a good learning experience for other countries that are yet to achieve a greener society. Climate change is real and we need to act globally in this.
Yeah, agreed. Tough question. The biggest challenges, well, what you could see throughout time is probably ensuring that we actually implement the right incentives to deploy the right technologies. So there's been some stories that Danish government wanted to incentivize building solar panels, and then that legislation kind of made too much pressure on building solar panels in Denmark.
Okay.
And it was so it had a negative effect, although that they wanted to do a good thing, then it actually had a negative effect, I would say. So that was one of the challenges, that ensuring that the legislation and the incentives and all the money you use on these green technologies, that they actually have the right result. And then I would say in historically and also in the future, it's these sectors that I also told about before. Agricultural sector, they are developing some really great solutions right now in terms of biogas and circular economy, but they do also emit a lot of CO2. The transport sector, private vehicles, how can we electrify it? All of that transition, we haven't found the solution right now, I would say. And then also the buildings. The buildings are super energy efficient. Yes. All the new buildings are being built, but across EU, there was a lot of old buildings that's super energy inefficient. So we need to renovate all of these buildings and make sure that they don't use unnecessary energy, because we simply don't have enough energy to do that. So some of those things that we do have some of the solutions, but we just need to implement it and make the investments. Yeah.
Of course. Well, I think we have no more questions, and thank you so much.
Actually, sorry, just for interrupting. Yeah. Yes. We have actually one question from Facebook also. Someone asking, so great presentation. Are there currently any plans in Denmark to specifically target waste production? Great that there is a focus on recycling, but how about reducing waste?
Yes, so that was also one of the part of this part climate law in June 2020 that I think it's Denmark wants to reduce waste by 90% in 2030, or no, not reduce waste, but increase recycling. So as said, we have a huge challenge with this waste production. So there is an aim to this classic reduce, reuse, recycle. So make sure that we use less waste. They are starting to, of course, develop legislation around it, but also technologies, both in the material that we use, the way we shop, and the consumers are very important in this as well. So that's one of the things. Recycling is quite high in Denmark already, but how can we recycle even more? So there's a new law on how many fractions that we should recycle our waste into as citizens. And of course also making sure that all of the plastic, for instance, that we actually collect in Denmark, that we use it for something and not send it to an Asian country to be incinerated, which happens a lot of times. It's a huge problem. So how can we make sure that all of this waste that we do recycle is actually being put into new value chains? And how can the Danish private sector take these, for instance, recycled plastic and design it to be part of their value chain? So that is a quite, I would say, big design challenge when looking at how do we make sure that this is an integrated part of all business models. So that's what they're looking at. And for, I know Niklas and Federica, you're living in Copenhagen, so you know that we also, now we have a big focus on food waste. And all Copenhageners, they have a green basket where they, hopefully all, they sort their food waste, and that is also used to produce biogas. So yes, there is a huge focus on that as well.
Great. I don't think we have any more questions. Niklas, do you know, did you receive other questions?
It looks like those are all the questions that we have at the moment. So first of all, I just want to take the opportunity to thank Charlotte so much for the presentation, for the great insights that we got, and also if people want to know more about your organization, how can they reach out to you? We will also then actually put the contact information on Facebook as well.
That's great. Well, I would just encourage you all to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. We share news about green solutions every day, and then sign up to a newsletter on stateofgreen.com. And then also from my side, thank you again so much for letting me be part of this, and thank you for the great questions. Some of them was a little bit hard, I think, but you're welcome to contact me in the future if you want some more details, or if you want some more content and meat on your answer, then I will try to do what I can. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. It was really, really great. Also, your answers to the questions.
Okay, thanks.